Have you ever found yourself staring at your bank statement and feeling that sudden drop in your chest before you even see the number? As if your mind already knew the verdict and you were only opening the envelope to confirm it. There is a very specific kind of person who carries a conviction so deep that they will be poor forever. They believe it with the same stubbornness that people believe who they are. And what they believe, they arrange their life around. It is not luck. It is not fate. It is a pattern. I have watched it enough times to map the steps. I will walk you through the inner machinery of that mind. I will show you how the subconscious runs a program that repels money, dignity, and real opportunity. I will show you the small, invisible choices that, added up, become a life chained to rising debt and shrinking options. But I am not here to shame. I am here to diagnose. I have a brutal compassion for people trapped in this loop. I also refuse to sugarcoat the truth. The jailer in this story lives inside the skull of the person who says, quietly and often, "This is just how my life is." You might see that person when you look in the mirror, or you might recognize them in someone you love. Either way, the first step is to stop pretending the pattern is random. It is not random. It is coherent. It obeys rules. If you want to change the outcome, you need to understand the rules. So stay with me. I will take this apart slowly. First, I will give you a clear X-ray of the type of mind that does this. Then I will show you the faces it takes. And finally, I will point out the hinge where everything can begin to shift. But before we go deeper, ask yourself a simple question. When you feared looking at the balance, what story were you telling yourself in that moment? That chest drop at the bank is not an isolated drama. It is a symptom. When someone reacts like that, a set of stories is already running in the background. I see those stories as layers. They are the language people use to explain money, and they shield the deeper belief beneath. The first layer is what they tell others. The second is what they tell themselves at night. The third is the rule they live by without noticing. On the surface, they often present as victims. The economy is rigged. My boss never promoted me. My parents didn't give me a chance. Those lines are rehearsed. They sound righteous. They keep the person safe. If you blame outside forces, you can avoid changing inside things. That is convenient. But talk to them in private, and you hear a different script. It sounds like complaint, yes. Yet beneath the complaint, there is a running theme. Money equals danger. Money equals shame. Money equals betrayal. They will say, if I had more, I'd just lose it, or rich people are different. They were born into it. Those sentences are not casual. They are rules, and rules direct behavior. I have watched people polish these scripts into identity. I'm not a money person, they say, like a badge. I'd rather be pure than rich, says another. These self-definitions do a lot of work. They keep the mind from looking at facts. They justify actions that otherwise feel stupid. The mind is a master at inventing coherence. Behavior follows. The person who claims to want freedom from debt will avoid conversations about investment. They will skip workshops. They will mock budgeting. They will buy things that soothe in the short term and then apologize for later. The salary arrives, and within days it is gone on small, relieving purchases. The result is predictable, month after month. Let me be precise about the patterns I see. They avoid the technical side of money. They fear numbers. They treat finance like a foreign language. But their avoidance is not ignorance. It is an armor. Knowing how money works forces them to confront a deeper fear, that they might be responsible for their future. Responsibility feels like risk. At the same time, they have a gravitational pull toward quick fixes. Payday loans, easy credit, financing. The promise of immediate relief beats the discipline of slow accumulation. This is not laziness. It is an emotional choice. Anxiety wants relief, and relief is often expensive. Debt arrives as a shadow companion, always ready to take the hit when the impulse wins. Contrast their public posture with the private behavior, and the contradiction is damning. They say they want abundance, but they set up a radar that only locks on scarcity. They talk about fairness and structural injustice, and then they make decisions that guarantee the very shortage they decry. The logic is consistent if you step back. They are behaving as if their deepest narrative is true, and the world, which mirrors behavior, responds accordingly. I told you I would show you scenes. Here are two that haunt me because I have seen them more times than I care to count. John gets paid on the first. He sits with the envelope for an hour, like someone handling evidence. He tells himself he will pay the bills. He makes a small ritual: coffee, a cigarette, a quick trip to the store for something he deserves. 2 days later, he's out of cash. A friend invites him to split a ride to a side job. He says he'll be there if there's time. There's never time. By the end of the month, he borrows on a card, pays interest, and learns again the old lesson. I knew it. It's never enough. That lesson then hardens into another seed of identity. Maria receives news that a promotion is possible. She freezes. Her internal voice says, "That's not for someone like me." She reheats all the reasons she should not try. "I'll embarrass myself. They'll see I'm not on their level. This will change how people expect things of me." Instead of applying, she trims her hours and complains about how the world doesn't recognize talent. She watches colleagues move up. Her mind files that as proof. Success is for other people. She loses a future income path she would have needed to shift her entire trajectory. These are small moments, but they compound. The brain catalogs them as evidence. And evidence is the fuel for belief. Once belief is strong, behavior becomes routine. Now, ask yourself, how often did you or someone you know do something small this month that felt like relief at the moment and pain later? The answer is the beginning of an honest inventory. If you keep doing those small acts, the large consequences are inevitable. There is another layer here I must name because it is subtle and often dressed as virtue. Many of these minds adopt a moral posture to justify scarcity. You will hear them say things like, "Money corrupts," or "I'd rather keep my integrity than chase profit." On its face, this sounds noble, but in practice it works as a moral veto against growth. It allows someone to wield spiritual language to avoid the practical work of improving their finances. The phrase becomes both excuse and identity. This moral posture varies. For some it is about purity. For others, it is anger. For a few, it is a covert pride. I survive without the trappings. Pride is dangerous because it rewards stagnation. It makes the person feel morally superior while their bank balance dwindles. Now, here is an uncomfortable truth. When people live this way, they are not passive victims of systems. They are participating in a dance with the system. Their beliefs make certain outcomes far more likely. The economy doesn't have to be rigged for them to be trapped. The mind's pattern is sufficient scaffolding. You might be thinking, this sounds harsh. I mean it to be. If you want change, you need to see the design. I say these things in the tone of a physician telling a diagnosis. The goal is not shame. The goal is clarity. Clarity precedes action. From this X-ray, we can already see the contradiction that organizes everything. The demand for freedom and dignity combined with repeated decisions that ensure bondage. That contradiction has many faces. In the next section, I will map the most common subtypes I encounter. These are not labels to shame you. They are mirrors. You may recognize yourself in one, or in more than one. Most people do. Before I move on, a small request. I record these ideas because I believe more people need to look themselves in the mirror. If this voice is helping you, consider subscribing. I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers so more of these conversations can exist. And if you feel brave, write your city and country in the comments. It helps me see who I am speaking to. For now, prepare to meet the faces behind the pattern. In the next part 1, we'll describe 4 of them. Maybe you are one of them. They all share the same engine, but the body looks different. I classify 4 subtypes because the fear of money dresses itself in predictable costumes. I name them not to box you, but to give you language. Language breaks denial. When you can name the style, you can see the pattern in your daily moves. First is the financial traumatized. This is the person who has been burned and now equates. They live with the comfort of knowing they avoided catastrophe, while still experiencing the cost of never fully trying. The narrative inside their head says safety equals smallness. That rule is lethal for long-term abundance. Here is the mirror question I asked them to say aloud. I was hurt by money. Am I now letting the hurt become my life's rule? Speaking, that is the first small crack. Second is the chronic undeserver. These are the people who whisper that they are imposters before anyone else has the chance. Their central sentence is, "This is not for people like me." They believe riches belong to others. They do not just doubt offers. They sabotage them. A day in their skin reads like self-sabotage in slow motion. They get an interview and invent reasons to cancel. They get a raise on paper and then behave rudely with the person offering it, as if to confirm they do not deserve it. They almost always underprice themselves and then explain it as humility. In truth, humility is a veil for fear. The undeserver's life is a parade of missed turning points. Opportunities come like doors. Instead of stepping through, they critique the prize behind the door until the door no longer matters. Their belief routine is a quietly cruel loop. Feel hopeful, self-sabotage, prove self-right. If this is you, hear my blunt but compassionate line. You are not a failure because you fail. You are failing because you are proving a story true. Third, I call the financial procrastinator. This one promises future change like a mantra. Next month, I will start saving. I will open that account on Monday. I'll take the course someday. Action is always scheduled for later. Later is a trap. We can be sympathetic. Life is busy, but the pattern is deliberate. A typical day for the procrastinator includes buying a course at midnight and never watching it. It includes downloading an app and ignoring notifications. It includes telling friends about plans to invest while spending the money on immediate comforts. Their belief is practical. Learning money costs time I do not have. The hidden logic, avoidance of discomfort, beats the slow work of competence. The cost is steep. Knowledge remains latent. Habits never form. The person blames external obstacles for their stalling, while their inertia accumulates debt. I tell them plainly, if you always wait to be ready, you will miss the only chance that trains readiness, doing the work while imperfect. Fourth is the unconscious rebel. This subtype is perhaps the most complex because it dresses resistance as ethics. The rebel sees prosperity as a sellout. They keep a moral ledger that credits them for choosing poverty. Their core sentence is, money is dirty. I will not be part of that. They inflate virtue by shrinking their demands. A day in the rebel's life can look romantic. They refuse corporate jobs. They scorn materialism. They wear their simplicity like a medal. But their simplicity is often reactive, not chosen. It protects a hidden resentment. If I take money, I betray myself. They punish themselves with scarcity to prove a point. This self-punishing posture is extraordinary because it marries radical autonomy with passive self-destruction. The rebel will give to causes, call out injustice, and then allow their own bills to pile up. They will lecture society while their own life frays. The rebel's harm feels noble until it is not. Then it is just harm. Each subtype produces its own predictable life outcomes. The traumatized hoards small safety nets and misses compound growth. The undeserver stagnates below potential and internalizes shame. The procrastinator never develops skill and stays dependent on urgent fixes. The rebel upholds a virtue of scarcity and pays for it in missed comfort and stability. You must understand something crucial. These types are not fixed labels. I have watched people shift between them over years. A traumatized person can become a procrastinator when they get tired. A rebel can become an undeserver after repeated failures. The map is fluid. That is the hopeful part. If you are not stuck in a single identity forever, you can choose a different route. Now I will give you a more detailed scene for the chronic undeserver, because this is where I see the most tragic waste. I remember Anna, a woman in her 30s, brilliant in her field. She grew up hearing that people like her did not get ahead. She carried that voice into her first big job. When the promotion came, she panicked. She literally threw away an offer because she convinced herself she would be exposed as incompetent. She said yes to work at a lower salary for stability. 5 years later, she had colleagues she trained become her bosses. Anna's inner narrative converted opportunity into proof that she was right. See, I don't belong. She never asked what would have happened if she had accepted the promotion. Later, when she tried to change, the bank-afraid part of her could not imagine making regular payments because a higher salary required higher expectations. She had closed many doors with one habit: self-denial. Here is a sharp mirror. If you find yourself apologizing for opportunities before you take them, you are practicing scarcity. If you want to change, begin by not apologizing for receiving offers. Practice saying thank you and then doing the work. That practice is more powerful than 1,000 pep talks. Let me be clear about the belief roots. Each subtype has a story at its center. Name it. Hold it in your mind. Speak it out loud. Traumatized. Money equals danger. Undeserver. I do not deserve this. Procrastinator. I will be ready later. Rebel. Money is betrayal. Saying this sentence makes it mortal. You can then test it. Consequences are both practical and spiritual. Practically, debts mount, relationships strain, sleep is poor. Spiritually, the person's sense of agency erodes. They tell themselves smaller stories and then live smaller. That is an erosion of soul as much as pocket. But I must press on a point most people resist. These subtypes are not random weaknesses. They are adaptations. They made sense in specific contexts. The traumatized adapted to trauma. The rebel adapted to avoid co-optation. The procrastinator adapted to overwhelm. The undeserver adapted to protect from humiliation. Those adaptations are understandable. They helped someone survive. The problem is when survival patterns calcify into lifelong scripts. I want to offer 2 practical tests you can do right now to see which subtype you most resemble. Test 1. When money appears, what is your first inner sentence? Be honest. Test 2. When an opportunity arrives, what is your smallest action? Do you celebrate, sabotage, defer, or reject? Those responses are the DNA of your subtype. If you took those tests and felt a small sting, good. Sting is a sign of nerve. It means the pattern is live. If there is no sting, that may be denial. Denial is just another flavor of the same disease. Either way, you have a choice. Before I close this part, I want to answer the question many of you are already asking. Can someone be in more than one subtype? Yes, most people are. We are messy. I have seen people who are procrastinators at work, rebels in values, and undeservers in romance. The important thing is not to collapse into guilt. The important thing is to map the terrain. Finally, here is the blunt truth that I always deliver. Recognizing your subtype is not a moral victory. It is a prerequisite for change. Identification is the first tool. After that comes practice, small actions repeated, and the patient dismantling of an internal logic that has produced suffering. In the next section, I will show you the invisible law that binds these faces together. That law explains why the world returns what you signal. If you have been feeling the drag of your choices, the next part will explain why the drag is not random. It is law-like, and once you see it, you can interrupt it. I call it the Law of Selective Confirmation. Say it out loud. It sounds clinical, almost cruel. But that cruelty is clarity. Someone who believes they will always be poor does not live in a world of random chance. They live inside a filter. The filter is simple and automatic. Belief acts like a lens. That lens chooses what you see and what you ignore. It strengthens small facts until they look like proof. It erases contrary evidence as anomaly, exception, or luck. This is not mystical. It is a functioning mind. Here is the chain I watch every time. A perception lands a bill, an insult, an old family story. The perception triggers an interpretation. I am not the kind of person who gets ahead. That interpretation produces emotion, anxiety, shame, dread. Those emotions then push behavior. So the law trades possibility for certainty. It hides risk inside the comfort of a known script. You can see this in small acts. Someone delays opening an account. That delay becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Identity becomes evidence. The law collects those small acts and writes them into the person's life. The result looks systemic. People call it bad luck or the economy. That is a convenient myth. The real architect sits inside the skull. Let me show you how this plays in two different minds. One person interprets a single debt as proof of incompetence. They shame themselves, then avoid financial classes. They avoid banks. Months pass. Their options disappear. The law calls this confirmation. Another person interprets the same debt as a solvable problem. They seek advice. They change habits. Their options expand. Two identical events. Two outcomes determined by an internal lens. Ask yourself where your lens is tuned. What story did you learn as a child about money? Which sentence do you repeat when under stress? Those sentences are not harmless thoughts. They are programming code. If you want to change your life, you must read the code. The law also works through emotion. Anxiety tightens focus on short-term relief. That relief often costs money. Credit cards become the immediate fix. Payday loans whisper safety. The law rewards the short-term escape with psychological comfort. The long-term consequence becomes the next piece of evidence for the original fear. There is a spiritual dimension here too, but it is practical, not poetic. People speak of vibrations or energy, meaning only that inner orientation shapes outward search. When you live convinced of scarcity, you send smaller, more cautious signals. The world answers in kind. If you broadcast fear, you will find fear. If you broadcast preparedness and curiosity, you will find openings that match. This law is merciless in one other way. It does not judge. It simply returns what you signal. That is hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful because it means you can change the signal. Terrifying because change requires you to stop blaming. Responsibility is the uncomfortable step. It asks you to own the programming that shaped your life. So what is under your control? Not markets or employers, but your tuning. You can practice seeing anomalies as anomalies. You can write contrary stories into your day. These acts do not require grand heroism. They require repetition. The law is statistical. Small consistent shifts change the distribution of outcomes over time. Before I move on, one small experiment. Tomorrow, when a small financial choice appears, watch the first sentence you tell yourself. Say it aloud. Then ask a different question. What if this is not about me being bad, but about me being inexperienced? That tiny reframing is a crack in the filter. It is the kind of crack that lets a new view leak through. Understanding the law is necessary, but not sufficient. Knowing the mechanism explains the pattern, but it will not stop the pattern. You can read the machine and still feed it the same coal. That is why we must look next at how this machine runs on loop. In the next part 1, we'll show the cycle in motion, the exact self-reinforcing loop that turns thought into debt and desire into surrender. And once you see it turn, you will see the places where you can insert a different gear. Are you ready to watch the loop run another time from the inside out? The cycle is deceptively simple. Thought begets emotion. Emotion begets action. Action begets result. Result begets thought again. It is circular. It is relentless. And it always runs faster than your conscious will. Start with the first thought. I will never have enough. I have heard that phrase so many times I can hear it in 1,000 accents. It sounds like despair. It functions like a command. That thought spikes adrenaline. The body seeks relief. The brain says, do something to feel safe. The something is usually immediate and visible. A purchase, a drink, a cigarette, an apology gift. The relief is short. The regret is long. Let me put you into 3 real scenes. Scene 1. Paolo receives his salary and sits on the edge of the bed. He opens his phone and scrolls social media to calm his chest. A targeted ad shows a new pair of shoes. He tells himself he deserves it. He buys them with his card. The pleasure floods in. 2 weeks later, the bills arrive. Panic returns. He borrows. Interest grows. The original thought, "I will never have enough," gets proof added. Scene 2. Aisha gets an email about a promotion. Her hands shake. She imagines being exposed, humiliated. She practices reasons to decline. She tells friends she prefers simpler work. The promotion goes to someone else. She feels vindicated and hollow. The thought again scores a point. It becomes louder. Scene 3. Marcus finds a small investment with clear terms. He tells himself he must be realistic. He reads headlines about market crashes. He labels the offer risky for people like me. He walks away. Years later, he watches a neighbor compound that seed into real security. Marcus feels the old belief echo. Opportunities are for others. The loop spins. Each scene contains the same mechanics. The initial belief drives interpretation. Interpretation triggers emotion. Emotion pushes a behavior that soothes now and harms later. The later harm becomes the evidence to justify the belief. The loop is tidy and cruel. There is another layer, identity labor. People do not merely make isolated mistakes. They organize their day around being the kind of person who would make those mistakes. If procrastination is safer than exposure, they will never build competence. If moral purity is safer than profit, they will never build margin. The loop then becomes cultural and social. Friends, family, even partners can mirror and reinforce the same script. Think of an old wound. Maybe it was a parent who said, "Money ruins people." The child internalizes that sentence. It becomes a rule for interpreting adult offers. If a proposal appears that looks like selling out, they feel righteous decline. The righteousness becomes armor. Armor keeps them pure and small. The outside world reads the smallness as truth and offers fewer chances. The loop feeds itself. Now watch the loop accelerate. Stress adds velocity. A sudden expense breaks the fragile plan. Panic short-circuits reflection. People default to patterns. If the pattern is avoidance, they flee. If the pattern is immediate relief, they spend. If the pattern is self-sabotage, they say the wrong thing and lose the thing. And each default produces new scarcity, new shame, and louder beliefs. This is why recovery from the cycle is not a single decision. It is a barrage of tiny, contrary choices. It is opening the bank app instead of avoiding it. It is saying thank you to an offer instead of apologizing. It is moving money into a new account even if the transfer is only $5. It is learning to treat evidence differently. Let me be honest. Breaking the loop requires friction. It is uncomfortable. The mind prefers the old pattern because it is known. To choose differently, you will have to practice displeasure. You will have to feel mild anxiety and not soothe it with purchase or avoidance. That is why so many people believe they are too weak. Weakness is not the problem. The habit of soothing is. There is a strategic point inside the cycle where you can intervene. It is the moment between emotion and action. That tiny second is the hinge. Training that second, naming the feeling, taking a breath, asking a question creates space. In that space, you can choose a different response. You can deposit 10 raise. You can send 1 email. You can pause a purchase and wait 48 hours. The change is small. The repeat is the work. This loop also plays out in relationships. Money fights start as simple slights. The partner who hoards may feel safer for it. The partner who spends may feel that purchases are affection. Each act calibrates the other. The household becomes a small economy of belief. The cycle, therefore, is social as well as personal. It propagates. I want to tell you a story of a woman who began to see the loop. Her name is Elena. She grew up ashamed of her family's bankruptcy. As an adult, she refused raises to avoid new expectations. A friend challenged her to keep 1 month of her salary in a separate account and not touch it. She mocked the idea, but tried it for a week. The inertia of not spending astonished her. She noticed how less reactive she felt. 2 months later, she accepted a small freelance gig she would have declined before. She was shaky, but she learned a new habit. Slow wins gathered. And then we will decide how to re-anchor the mind before it breaks you. The accumulation looks small for years. Late fees. One missed payment. A second card opened just in case. It compounds like a slow leak. At first you wipe the water and go back to sleep. Then the ceiling sags. One day it caves. I have watched people live in that slow leak until a single event terrifies them. An eviction notice. A repossession. The phone call from the bank that begins, "We need to talk." The shock is both practical and moral. Practical because shelter and transport are at stake. Moral because shame lands like a second wound. The pattern that once seemed safe now looks like betrayal. When the collapse lands, there is a narrow fork. One path is familiar. Blame the world. Demand revenge. Double down on the old story. Others will watch from a distance and nod because they share similar scripts. This path secures identity. It is easier. The other path is rarer and costlier. It is to look inward with honesty. To name the loop. To say, "I did this." That admission is a radical act. It dissolves the comfortable narrative of victimhood. It exposes the person to accountability. Accountability is painful. It is also the necessary medicine. Let me put you in a scene. A man named Raphael wakes to the sound of a truck. He sees his sofa on the curb. The bailiff has arrived. He feels fury and humiliation. He hears his mother's voice from childhood. "We always get left behind." He wants to burn the world down. Instead, something smaller happens. He calls an old colleague. He asks for a temporary job. He apologizes to his partner. The apology is the first honest financial act of his adult life. That small honesty begins to reroute the loop. In other cases, the collapse is quieter, but no less decisive. A woman named Layla misses work for exhaustion. Her energy has been sapped by sleepless weeks of money worry. Her partner leaves because the emotional drain is too much. She sits alone and realizes her avoidance of finance was a strategy to avoid feeling small. She enrolls in a basic budgeting class at night. She starts leaving voice memos to herself when tempted to spend. The memos are awkward at first. They become data. They map the triggers. Slowly, the map becomes a plan. I do not romanticize the collapse. It is brutal. It strips away illusions. It also creates an opening that polite caution rarely provides. When someone hits the bottom, they finally have evidence that the old script is costly. That evidence can be the fertilizer for a new mental garden, but only if they choose to use it. Choice is the crux. Many people believe choice is a luxury for those who already have margin. I have seen that belief become a self-fulfilling barrier. The truth is different. Choice is a muscle. It grows with exercise, not with favorable conditions. When you start making small, deliberate choices, you build the capacity to make larger ones. The first choice is often only symbolic. It matters because it sends a new message inward. I can act differently. This is where responsibility becomes revolutionary. To accept that your programming shaped outcomes is not to accept guilt as a permanent state. It is to reclaim agency. Reclaiming agency begins by naming the specific rule that guided you. Was it, "I must never disappoint anyone financially," or "I will not become like them"? Speak the rule out loud. Hear how antiquated it sounds. Rules become easier to change when they are visible. I will not lie. Reprogramming after collapse takes work and humility. It may require negotiating with lenders, restructuring debts, or changing careers. It may require therapy or accountability groups. It will require repetitive, small acts that contradict your old script. Those acts are gritty. They are not glamorous, but they build a new statistical reality. New choices compound into new opportunities. There is also mercy in this process. I have seen people who lost almost everything rebuild better than before. They carry scars. They also carry new discipline. A cleaned ledger becomes a kind of temple. One man I know started tracking 10 reais a day. It was humiliating at first. Months later, he had 3 months of expenses saved. He slept again. He applied for a training course. That course became a promotion. The collapse never feels worth it at the moment. But recovery can yield clarity not available to those who never break. Understand, too, that the path of responsibility does not promise comfort. It promises coherence. It promises alignment between what you say you want and what you do. That alignment matters more than comfort in the long run. Comfort built on avoidance collapses sooner or later. Coherence built on small actions endures. If you are standing at a fork now, here are 3 minimal interventions that matter. First, inventory your money without drama. Write down what is owed. The act of seeing is stabilizing. Second, tell one trusted person your plan and ask them for one accountability check each week. Shame hates company. Accountability uses it. Third, pick one tiny action you can repeat daily. It can be as small as transferring 5 reais to a savings pot. Repeat it. The repetition rewires expectation. I want to be blunt. None of these steps erase structural injustice. Some people face systemic obstacles that massively complicate recovery. Acknowledging personal patterns does not negate real external constraints. It does not blame the person for poverty, but it gives them a lever they often believe they do not possess: the ability to alter internal programming that informs how they interact with the system. Finally, know this: collapse can be a teacher if you let it. The lesson is not that you are bad. The lesson is that a set of repeated thoughts has been running you. Once you can name that program, you can change it. You will feel quake and grief in the process. That is normal. It is also honest. If you stay, the loop will continue to build pressure until something else breaks. If you begin to act, the first small victories will feel fragile but real. The next part will show precisely how to build those first victories into durable practice. I will give you a concrete ritual you can start tonight to begin interrupting the pattern. If you survive this section, know this: survival is not the same as thriving, but survival creates the ground from which thriving grows. Are you prepared to do something tonight that proves you can be different tomorrow? I will be blunt. Reprogramming is not a pep talk. It is a new operating system you install by refusing the old one, day after day. I call the new system responsibility financial consciousness. That label is dry, but what it points to is simple and brutal. You stop treating money as an extension of your worth and start treating it as a set of facts, actions, and small habits you can influence. You stop waiting for some external hero. You become the agent. This shift begins with a refusal to accept certain sentences as true. The sentence I want you to notice is the one you whisper when you check your balance and already feel defeated. This will never be enough. Say it in your head now and notice the body reaction. That physiological hitch is the gate. Reprogramming starts by making that reaction visible. I ask people to name it. That's fear, that's scarcity, that's shame, and then to hold the name for 3 slow breaths. Naming reduces the charge. It is the first mechanical intervention between the old loop of thought and action. Naming alone is not the work. Naming is the key that opens the door to a set of tiny, repeatable moves. The ritual I have given many people and seen change lives is simple and concrete. At night, write. Not for social media. Not for a coach. Write to yourself in a small notebook. Note one belief you heard yourself repeat that day. Note one thing that contradicted it, even if tiny. Then write one action you will take the next day, an action so small that failure would be impossible. Make the action visible and mechanical. Put a transfer on autopay for 10 Brazilian reals. Send one email. Open the bank app and look for 1 minute. The point is to create evidence that your inner rhetoric is not the script of your life. Let me walk you through how this looks in practice. Elena, the woman I mentioned earlier, began with mockery. She laughed at the idea of keeping a month's salary in a separate account. Then she tried it for a week. She told herself it was an experiment. On day 1, she felt panic pulled to spend the money on small certainties. She wrote, "Belief, I cannot save. I will need this." She then underlined that she had. In the same week, remembered a bill and found 50 Brazilian reals set aside in an old pocket. The next morning, she moved 20 Brazilian reals. She scheduled a weekly transfer of 5 Brazilian. If you still want it, wait 24 hours. Making delays ritualized defeats a kind of reflex. The mind loves to win quick fights. You are training it to lose small ones so it can win big later. I also teach what I call the micro-contract. This is not a promise to the universe. It is a tiny legalism between you and yourself. Choose one small, measurable financial behavior and sign it in your notebook. It could be, I will transfer 10 Brazilian reals to savings every Friday, or I will open my bank app for 1 minute on Mondays. Sign the page. Date it. Tell one person what you signed. Accountability transforms private guilt into a public small test. Shame hates exposure. Discipline uses it. Do not confuse small with meaningless. The brain is a pattern machine. It reads events as evidence. One transferred 10 Brazilian reals is a new datum stored against the old registry that said, I never save. The repeated datum becomes heavier than the myth. Months later, the ledger reads differently. That is what Elena discovered. That is what Raphael discovered too, but in another register. Raphael's story is darker at the start. He woke to his sofa on the curb, a bailiff on the street, and a small son asleep beside him. That night, he did not write a heroic plan. He did something smaller. He called an old colleague and asked for 2 days of temp work. He cleaned his profile and prepared a short note to send to 3 local agencies. He also wrote one line in his notebook. I will answer 1 job message today. The act was a micro-contract. It reoriented the field of possibility from I am ruined to I am responding. 1 honest email led to a day labor gig. 2 weeks of small answers stabilized a bit. Months later, he could negotiate with a creditor from a position of response rather than shame. The mechanics were the same as Elena's. Tiny, consistent acts that created new evidence. You will want a map for the internal terrain you need to cultivate. The first vector is attention, make the feel of your money anxiety visible. The second vector is small action, perform a visible corrective. The third vector is testimony, tell one person and write it down. The fourth is repetition, make the behavior non-negotiable for at least 42 days. That number is not mystical. It is practical. Habit forms through repetition. Neural pathways strengthen when they receive repeated input. If you perform the micro-contract consistently for 6 weeks, your mind will treat it as part of identity. I am the kind of person who transfers 10 Brazilian reals every week. That identity change is the most durable currency. Now let us talk about language. I have watched people sabotage themselves with pious phrasing. I don't care about money, they claim, in a way that is meant to signal moral advantage. Or they say, I am not materialistic, as if denial creates purity. These are protective stories. They have 2 problems. 1, they keep you blind to the actual ledger. 2, they monetize moral superiority at the cost of practical life. The new posture asks for a different sentence. I choose practices that generate security. Say it out loud. It is neither romantic nor shaming. It is a factual commitment. You will also have to train the hinge between emotion and action. This is the most tactical part. When anxiety spikes, you must do something that is not soothing but also not punitive. The behavior should be a neutral refocus. A breath, a short walk, a 30-second log into a budget app. Anything that interrupts the urge to solve with purchase or to freeze with avoidance. The appeal of soothing is quick and potent. The appeal of neutral refocus is weak at first, but repeat the weak move and the brain begins to expect it. Expectation is the secret. If your body expects a small neutral move to follow anxiety, it will stop demanding consumption. Let's be precise about what to do tonight. Before bed, write this. The single belief you heard yourself say today about money. 1 small fact that contradicts it. 1 action you will take tomorrow that you can complete in 5 minutes. Date it. Sign it. Put the notebook by your bed. This is not therapy. It is a training manual. In the morning, do the action before you check any social feed. This order matters. Social feeds amplify the old script. The notebook anchors the new one. The practice will be awkward. It will feel juvenile at first. You may even mock it. Good. Mocking is safer than avoiding. It means some part of you remains curious. Hold the curiosity and move. The ritual's power is not in the grandeur of the action. It is in the repetition. The ritual will also force you to tolerate small amounts of discomfort without numbing them. That tolerance breeds a different type of courage, a courage that expenses prudence rather than spectacle. There will be resistance. The resistance speaks in many voices. I'm too busy. This is too small to matter. I tried before and failed. Answer each presumption with one sentence. I am willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of future ease. Repeat that line like a simple liturgy. Make it tactile by pairing it with an action, a transfer, an email, a breath. You will not feel heroic. You will feel steady. This is where systems matter. Build a basic architecture you can maintain. One pot for emergency savings. One transfer scheduled. One notebook for the financial disproof journal. One trusted person who will ask you each week, did you do the thing you promised yourself? That architecture externalizes friction in a useful way. It creates mechanical defense against the mind's tendency to return to script. Finally, keep the spiritual honesty. Saying, I take responsibility, is not blaming yourself for structural injustice. It is naming the lever you control. There are real systemic obstacles. Those do not disappear when you act. But acting changes the terms of engagement. You do not have to wait for conditions to be perfect to begin reorganizing your interior practices. The smallest acts compound. They buy you time, and time buys you options. If you follow this ritual for months, you will notice something odd. The world does not suddenly become kinder. It becomes more legible. Opportunities that once looked like threats begin to look like choices. That is the promise of this work. Tomorrow I will show what those changes look like in the actual world, the small scenes where the new pattern meets reality and begins to alter outcomes. I will show the micro victories and the stubborn failures, because both will teach you what to do next. The change is not cinematic. It is cumulative. Stay for the part where consequences begin to show up. When people ask me what success looks like in this context, I refuse a single photograph. Success is a portfolio of small, demonstrable shifts. It begins with how you read a bank statement and ends with how you accept or refuse an offer. The new pattern reveals itself in little scenes at first. Those scenes are where belief meets world and changes it gradually. Imagine a month in the life of someone who has adopted the small rituals. At the beginning of the month, they check their account out of habit and feel the old pull of doom. They pause, name the feeling, and breathe. Then they open their notebook and read the last 3 entries. Each entry records a tiny action that contradicts the old belief. That reading produces a slight reorientation. Instead of panicking, they transfer 20 Brazilian reals to the emergency pot and set a timer for 10 minutes to search for one freelance gig. The act is not heroic. It is accountable. By the end of the month, those 20 Brazilian reals transfers add up. The emergency pot stops being an abstract wish and becomes a small buffer. The buffer does not remove the possibility of crisis. It dampens the shock. These are measurable outcomes. A person stops defaulting to credit for everyday relief. Late fee bills drop. Sleep improves. Relationships loosen the constant financial tension. Trust returns in tiny ways. A partner sees steadier behavior and is less likely to make crisis the center of every conversation. That steadiness invites different offers. A supervisor notices doubling down on reliability. A neighbor hears less complaint and more action. Small changes in the ledger change social cadence. Let me give you 2 fuller scenes that show the texture of this future alternative. The first is Layla's. When I met her, she was exhausted. Debt calls had trained her to fear phones. She had avoided the bank for years, and her partner left because he could not handle the constant retreat from responsibility. Layla began with humiliation. She showed up at night school and enrolled in a budget class. She could not afford the class, but she found a volunteer position cleaning the classroom for a month in exchange for, after 3 days, he always had better clarity. Sometimes he still bought. More often he did not. The deferred purchases later funded a course that delivered higher earnings. The shoes were gone. The course stayed. This is not metaphysics. It is statistical reality. Delay created margin. Margin created options. Margin is the unsung currency here. It is not cash only. It is time, attention, and psychological capacity. The old pattern consumes margin by converting every anxiety into urgent consumption or panic. The new pattern protects margin by converting anxiety into small, non-reactive acts. That difference compounds. You should expect setbacks. The old pattern is seductive because it offers immediate relief and a familiar identity. It also has a social ecosystem that will try to lure you back. Friends who spend loudly will invite you to spend. Family narratives will demand the old scripts for explanation and solidarity. Prepare for social friction. That is normal. You will have to explain yourself. You will have to say, perhaps more than once, I am doing something different. You will have to endure someone calling you stingy or aloof. That is a sign the pattern is working. Behavior that changes outcomes will change relationships. Some will leave. Some will adapt. Both reactions are instructive. Now a harder truth. Progress is not linear. There will be months where the emergency hits and your savings evaporate. Those months will not mean failure if you have practiced the ritual before. They will simply be reversals that you can respond to without moral collapse. The new system gives you the ability to rebuild without catastrophe. It keeps you in the game. Here is a practical map of timelines to expect. After the first week of ritual, you will feel less frantic in 1 or 2 moments. After 1 month, you will likely have one small reserve. After 3 months, you will have muscle memory for the pause and a clearer pattern of behavior. After 6 months, people around you will note the difference. After a year, your mindset will have materially shifted. That is the arc I have watched repeatedly. The key is the compounding of small acts. I must tell you about a man named Carlos because his arc includes a shock that tests the horizon of this work. Carlos was my skeptic in chief. He had read the advice, mocked it, and tried it for 2 days just to prove it dull. Then his father died and left a small debt to be settled. Panic hit like a wave. He had 2 options: fall into the old mode of consuming to numb the grief, or apply the tiny practices he had joked about. He did the latter, almost accidentally. He logged the feeling, made 3 tiny phone calls to agencies, and sat with the discomfort for 20 minutes without soothing it. That spacing allowed him to think pragmatically about what was owed and negotiate. Not a triumph, not a disappearance of grief, but a set of transactions that paid the debt without a collapse. Months later, he told me that the ritual saved him from a spiral he had no energy to climb out of. The ritual's witness had become a resource. You will see opportunity differently. Instead of viewing a raise as a trap of expectation, you will evaluate it as a sequence of choices. Does the raise require more hours that steal your health? Does it open a door to promotion? You will ask practical questions because you have started to see how small choices scale. That perspective protects you from self-sabotage and from moralistic avoidance. There is a social consequence I need to name plainly. People who once offered you identification through shared scarcity will accuse you of abandoning the tribe when you change. They will use language that shames change. You are selling out. You have become someone different. Those accusations are not always mendacious. Often they are expressions of fear. People see your altered behavior and are forced to test their own. You might lose some social credit. That is inevitable. You will gain something else. You will gain the chance to choose companions that support your trajectory. Let me be clear on one point. This program does not promise comfort. It promises coherence. Comfort built on avoidance collapses. Coherence built on small, consistent choices endures. The future I describe is not a fantasy of wealth. It is the ordinary reduction of crisis, the accumulation of sleep, the gradual reclaiming of dignity. The new pattern gives you authority to enter conversations about money. You will no longer be the person who blames fate. You will be the person who shows receipts and asks for help. The old pattern will howl as you change. Expect temptation, relapses, social friction, and inevitable losses. Expect 2 small victories, a friend offering a job lead, a roommate who stops borrowing without returning, a bank offering a better plan because you asked. The micro wins will begin to outnumber the micro disasters. That is the margin. If you want a timeline, pick a 6-week test. The ritual, the micro contract, the notebook, the naming, the delay. Do them every day. After 6 weeks, look back at the entries. Count how many days you acted differently. Count the small savings. Count the nights you slept without the tightness. That ledger is the evidence you asked for. It will be messy. It will also convince you in a way arguments never will. In the next section, I will bring this inward work to a close with a direct challenge and a very small, immediate practice you must try tonight. I will mirror you back what you've been seeing and ask you to pick a single belief to strike through. This will be the test of whether you are ready to move from listening to doing. If you stay, we will end by making one small change together. You have heard the pattern. You have seen the law. You have watched the micro shifts that begin to pull a life out of the loop. Now it comes down to a moment of honesty. I will not offer a flourish. I will offer a clear question. Are you the person who will keep narrating their poverty, or are you the person who will begin the first contradictory acts tonight? The thesis of what I have said is simple. A recurring belief, I will always be poor, organizes a predictable set of emotions, behaviors, and results. Those results then become the evidence that confirms the belief. It is not mystical. It is coherent. To escape, you need to alter the evidence one small piece at a time. Evidence changes identity. Identity changes habit. Habit changes life. So here is a concrete closure. Tonight, before sleep, do 3 things. First, write down the single limiting belief you noticed today about money. Be brutal. Be specific. I cannot save anything. I am always a day away from disaster. Or, people like me don't get raises. Write it and read it aloud. Hearing the sentence breaks the spell. Second, pass an emphatic line through the middle of that sentence and write immediately below. This is a program, not a fact. Programs can be rewritten. The line is symbolic, but also a ceremonial punctuation. Third, write one action you will do tomorrow that directly contradicts the belief and that you can complete in 5 minutes. Commit to the time. Commit to the fact of it. I want you to do that now, not tomorrow, tonight. The smallness of the task is the point. Pride wants a grand exercise. Pride also kills persistence. Pick a tiny act. Schedule it. Tell one person you will do it. Accountability externalizes friction and makes failure visible in a useful way. Let me give you a script you can use in your head when the old pattern yells. Say to yourself, I see you, thought. You are not the boss. Then name the feeling: anxiety, shame, fear, and breathe. Then take the small action you promised. That sequence interrupts automaticity and trains the hinge between emotion and action. Repeat it for 30 days, and you will begin to build a different kind of nervous system around money. For those who fear that this is a moral indictment of poverty, hear me plainly. This is not blame. There are structural injustices that make everything harder for some people. Recognizing internal patterns is not excusing systems. It is identifying a lever you can use now. The lever is internal practice. Without it, you are handing your life to the same ancient machinery that produced the problem. With it, you do not deny systems. You create capacity to work inside them differently. I will name 2 mistakes people make when they first try this. The first is waiting for a feeling of readiness. I'll start when I have enough time, when the panic passes. The panic rarely passes if you do nothing. The second is doubling down on grand plans. I'll save half my salary next month, then the month collapses. Both are modes of avoidance that feel righteous. The antidote is the ritual of smallness. You might ask, what if I fail? Fail often. Failure is data. When you fail, write what happened. Name the trigger. Make the corrective action smaller. Failure informs redesign. That is the pragmatic theology of this. You will use that file on bad days. Remember the stories. Elena moved 20 Brazilian reals and then 10 Brazilian reals and built a cushion that changed her posture at work. Raphael answered one email, and that chain of small answers created a path out of immediate catastrophe. Layla negotiated one due date and regained the breath necessary to work. These are not parables of instant success. They are records of repetition and the steady accrual of dignity. You may feel the urge to make this a moral litmus. Resist it. The work is not about proving virtue. It is about changing relationship with facts. You can be generous and financially literate. You can care about justice and also practice saving. You can love your people and be responsible. Those things coexist. They are not opposites. Now a final, practical challenge. Pick the one belief you wrote tonight and put the notebook on your pillow. Sleep with the intention of performing the tiny act you promised. In the morning, do the act before checking social feeds or messages. Do not talk yourself out of it. Then, at the end of the day, write one sentence in your evidence file. I did the thing. That sentence is a deposit. Each deposit compounds. I want to end with a small request. If this material landed for you at some point, consider sharing one line in the comments below, the city or country you are in, and one small act you commit to this week. Public naming is not for show. It is a mechanism of honesty that I use with the people I coach. It makes the internal pattern social and therefore easier to change. If you stay, do that tonight. This is not a promise that your life will become easy. It is a promise that you will begin to have different leverage. You will stop being someone who waits to be saved by luck or by scandal. You will become someone who arranges conditions so luck lands on a person who is ready. That readiness is not a feeling. It is a ledger. It is a notebook. It is a small transfer. It is the decision to answer one email. Thank you for listening. If you stayed until here, write your belief, cross it, and do the smallest thing tomorrow. Then come back and tell me what you did. I will be listening, and so will others who have chosen to move from story to action.